The conclusion of the First World War brought with it the creation of several new states, many of which were just regaining their independence after years of occupation. Two of the most noteworthy of them being the multinational Czechoslovakia and a reborn Poland, both of which had fought incredibly hard for their independence, and when the powers of Austria, Germany, and Russia finally collapsed, they were able to split away. But trying to redraw the borders of states that had ceased to exist long ago proved a difficult task. Ethnic lines between the Poles and the Czechs and the Slovaks weren't clear and cut. Because of this, disputes between the two states would soon emerge. The center stage of these laid in an area called Teschen, or Teschen, located in the southernmost point of Silesia. Interestingly, negotiations between representatives from both groups had started before World War I was even over, though these bore no fruits. Prior to 1914, the area had a Polish population of a little over 54% and a Czech population of 27%, with the rest of the inhabitants being made up of Germans and Jews. Most importantly, the region was one of the most industrialized in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and possessed large deposits of coal. On the 5th of November, 1918, an agreement was signed between the local Polish and Czechoslovak authorities that divided the region along ethnic lines, with most going to Poland and a small slice going to Czechoslovakia. What Czechoslovakia lost in population was made up for in resources, as they acquired 26 out of the region's 36 coal mines, though control of the rail line would have to be shared between the two states. However, this agreement was only a temporary measure, and the central governments of both would have to sort things out. The official agreement between the victorious allies was that most of Teschen would go to Poland. The Czechoslovaks were obviously disappointed in this decision. Despite calls for self-determination, a sizable Czech minority was incorporated into Poland and was perceived as a violation of Czechoslovakia's vital space. The Czechoslovaks argued on the basis that Teschen belonged to them on historic arguments, but the Poles were not buying it and scheduled for parliamentary elections to be held in late December. On the 17th, Polish troops were deployed to the area, while Czechoslovak troops mobilized 2 days later. On the 23rd, 3 days before the elections were to be held, Polish forces had withdrawn from the area. The Czechs, however, did the exact opposite and invaded the region in what has been called the 7 Days War. The Czechoslovaks brought forth 10,000 soldiers, most of them veterans of World War I, equipped with 28 machine guns and an armored train, commanded by General Josef Snedarek. The Polish forces, commanded by General Franciszek Latinik, were outnumbered, only having 7,050 troops, many of them being militiamen and police officers, though they did have access to artillery, cavalry, and armored trains. To make matters worse for the Poles, their forces were spread thin along the whole border, facing threats from all their neighbors. At 1 p.m. on the 24th, the Czechoslovaks crossed the border in force. The advance was spearheaded by 2 regiments led by Italian officers in Czechoslovak uniforms. Considering some units were stationed in Italy during World War I, it appears that some of the officers accompanied them for whatever reason. The Polish troops were caught off guard and their border positions were quickly overrun. The Czechs made quick progress, taking the cities of Bohemian and Orlova and the coal mines of Karvina. After 1 day of fighting, the Poles had been pushed back to the proximities of Skoczów, where they held back the Czechs for several days in the most famous battle of the war. Along the rest of the front, however, the Poles were much less successful, and the Czechs captured the regional capital of Teschen. The Czechs continued to push forward, crossing the Vistula and cutting off an important rail line. The Czechoslovaks probably could have continued to advance, but the Entente began to pressure both sides into accepting a ceasefire. On the 3rd of February, representatives of the warring sides, along with the US, Britain, and France, signed the Paris Protocol, which approved of the creation of a special commission to investigate the territorial dispute, and the Czechoslovak military withdrew from the area. On the 25th of May, Polish Prime Minister Paderewski and Czechoslovak President Masaryk initiated talks in Prague to resolve the conflict. The Poles insisted that a plebiscite be held, which would likely benefit them the most. The Czechs, fearing that they would lose, refused his proposal, and arguments over the fate of Teschen went on for a year. In July 1920, the crisis was finally resolved for arbitration from the Allies during the Paris Peace Conference. It was decided that the region would be divided between the Osla River, while a few extra territories were interchanged between the two parties. Czechoslovakia had successfully expanded their borders at the expense of Poland, while Poland was incapable of pursuing a more favorable outcome due to their war with the Bolsheviks. Czechoslovakia's victory was primarily due to diplomatic factors. The Czechs and the Slovaks spent much of World War I and after gaining the sympathies of the great powers, which benefited them in the resolution of this conflict. In total, Poland suffered 92 killed, 855 injured, 576 taken prisoner, and 813 missing or deserted. The Czechoslovaks, on the other hand, suffered only 60 killed and 124 wounded. These numbers may seem small in the grand scheme of things, especially when compared to other conflicts, but for such a small war, they seem quite high, which just goes to show how intense the fighting was. 40,000 Poles living in the Czechoslovak zone were then summarily expelled from their homes and were taken in as refugees in Poland. Many Polish POWs were also executed during the conflict, further adding salt to the wound. Unsurprisingly, the Polish government held a grudge against the Czechoslovaks that would hinder any attempts at reconciliation. The issue over Teschen would once again flare up in 1938 when Hitler was busy carving up Czechoslovakia. Seizing upon this opportunity, Poland, with Hitler's consent, invaded the region and a few others on the 2nd of October, being followed by the Polonization of these areas and the expulsion of 30,000 Czech civilians. When Polish troops entered the region, the Czech general in charge told his Polish counterpart that he wouldn't enjoy this possession for long, and he was right, as Poland was next on Hitler's hit list. After Germany's defeat, Poland and Czechoslovakia were occupied by the Red Army, and Stalin began redrawing their borders like a white man in Africa. It was ultimately decided by the Soviets that the 1920 border between the two states would be restored, and that's how it's remained till this day. You'd think this would be the end of it, but in May 2020, Polish troops mistakenly crossed the Czech border and occupied part of a small town, though this was quickly resolved. Thankfully, no one has seriously questioned the current border, and relations between everyone has remained on good terms. The Polish-Czechoslovak War is quite literally a forgotten war, with only people from the states involved really remembering it. For such a small conflict, it may have had serious ramifications by straining relations between the Poles and the Czechoslovaks. Perhaps if it didn't occur, or had been resolved peacefully, the two states could have formed closer relationships, maybe even helping each other defend themselves from the Germans, and perhaps changing the course of history. That's all for today. If you liked the video, then you can consider subscribing, or better yet, you could donate to my Ko-fi page. Whatever you choose, it's greatly appreciated. Anyways, thanks for watching and take care. Goodbye.
How'd you sleep last night?